So how many people had fun last night? That's good. Pardon? I know. The regional chief put on a nice evening last night, and I want to make sure that we thank him for it, because it's often that we come and spend days away from our families, and we go to our hotel rooms, and it's kind of lonely at night. So last night was a good break from that loneliness, and I hope everybody had a really good time and enjoyed the evening and are ready to work hard today. So without further ado and sucking up any more time on the mic, I will ask us to invite National Chief Perry Bellegarde to the mic to do his formal address. Perry.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to Elder Will Good for that song and that spirit of that drum to wake us up, and acknowledging the land and the territory and all of our grandmothers and grandfathers in this territory here. Nista Pepikskyn heon am sisi just nista ne naskamun kena naskum tenu kahkia oki mawak kiteiak napewak iskoyak kahkia no temtek no akul magna kuta kena naskum tin no chagan chief TG invitation petute kun as well to the Schneimo. I want to say that the right way as best I can for hosting it here. First Nation Chief Michael Weiss as well and his team. Acknowledge as well the local chiefs too. They call him Chip Seymour, Chief Chip, and as well Chief Clint Williams as well, surrounding First Nations here. So Chief TG, thank you for the invitation to be here. The BC Chiefs Forum AFN, and I acknowledge as well our colleagues on the executive. Chief Ghislain is here from the Belle Province de Quebec, and I believe Chief Kawani will be coming here soon as well from the Yukon territory, just coming off hosting a major two-day meeting about climate crisis. We'll call it climate change, but it's more a climate crisis, climate destruction. So I acknowledge and lift her up for her good work and efforts. This morning, Chiefs, in the territory here. I wanted to talk about 4 or 5 things coming up, and of course, we acknowledge the Wet'suwet'en peoples and what's going on, and we lift up all the Wet'suwet'en peoples, the duly elected chiefs, the hereditary chiefs, all the people within that nation, because something that happened was a wake-up call to everybody that governments have recognized a traditional governance system. And that helps us. It helps every one of us as we try to move beyond the Indian Act. We don't need to reconstitute ourselves as nations, because we've always been nations. The reaffirmation and standing up in your own laws, standing up your own laws is so very important. And so I lift up all the people in the Wet'suwet'en Nation and tribe for what they're doing, because it's helping everybody across Canada realize that there is another jurisdiction that has been forgotten. And we can go back and look at all the constitutional documents from the Royal Proclamation of 1763, the BNA Act of 1867, Section 9124, federal government's response for Indians and Indian lands, and how the Constitution clearly outlines the federal government's responsibility on one hand, clearly outlines provincial government responsibility on the other hand. The sad part is they forgot about another jurisdiction, your sovereignty, your nationhood, and your laws. And so we lift them up because it's an opportunity for all of us to really move beyond the Indian Act now and stand in our own laws. And I've said this before, occupy the field, create your own laws and exert jurisdiction. Whether you're talking about citizenship, whether you're talking about child welfare, whether you're talking about marrying your own people. And I even said this one time to a group of chiefs, it's not until we can bury our own dead and marry our own children will you see self-determination in play. And think about that statement for a while, chiefs. What happens when someone dies? You need a death certificate. Who signs that? When somebody gets married, what do you need? A marriage certificate. So what are we talking about when we talk about self-determination, self-government? Recognizing your own laws, stand in your own laws and your own power and authority as First Nations. I also want to say, this is brought up, the whole question about, and people put this in quotes, the rule of law. And again we say, what a good opportunity for respecting another law in this country in addition to common law and civil law. Wet'suwet'en law, Nehiyawak law, Haida law, Shimshan law. The different nations have laws. And that should be respectful, a respectful process or place for other governments to respect those laws. And so yesterday, Chief Gisnan talked about justice. And until we can start looking at a true restorative justice process, and it's not just, I say, tinkering with the justice system right now through sentencing circles, which are helpful, probation workers, all the things got to be changed around. So moving forward on restorative justice initiatives, finding ways to deal with the poverty and the housing and the lack of education and opportunities, dealing with the social determinants of health, and making sure that our people, because we're 5% of the population in Canada, but 30–40% of the jails are filled by our people. So we know all the stats. The plan to fix it. So restorative justice, no question. And we will not find justice in Canada until the rule of law is expanded to respect and recognize First Nations laws in addition to common law and civil law. And that's where we need to keep moving towards. Always keep moving towards that. We've said this before, when our people go to court, they're courts of law, not courts of justice. And so we have a lot of work to do in that. And we're going to take this opportunity created by the Wet'suwet'en peoples to move that forward. Because the underlying issue is not only moving beyond the Indian Act. What a great opportunity we have to fix 4 outdated policies. 4 outdated policies. And I don't even like using this word claims, but that's what they use right now. So you have an understanding of what I'm talking about, the comprehensive claims process. It's like I said, it's almost like land restoration and land respect process back for Indigenous peoples, First Nations people. But that has to be fixed. The specific claims process, the additions to reserve process, and the big one, the inherent right to self-government policy. 4 policies, we've said, that are currently based on termination of rights and title, not recognition of rights and title. So the process and the plan to fix them, to get them up to date with what the Supreme Court of Canada is saying, the judicial branch of government, this foreign government is saying, we respect Aboriginal rights and title. We respect treaties and treaty rights, and they should be honored and implemented according to the spirit and intent. So does the legislative and the executive branch of government keep up with the judicial branch? The answer is no, quite clearly. So fixing those 4 policies, what a golden opportunity now that we have to take advantage of to get those 4 policies updated, because they're just policies. They're not laws, they're not treaties, but they're policies. And they need to be fixed. And that's something that's, I'm going to say we're going to keep pushing for in terms of coming out of what's happening across Turtle Island right now. I also want to say, Chiefs, an update, speech from the throne, because the federal budget's coming down. And I've said this to you before, that one of the main jobs of National Chief and the AFN executive is to lobby and influence Suni, I call him Sunia Ogimao in Cree. That's the big money chief. That's Bill Morneau. He's the guy that puts the federal budget together. He's the one that decides what Mark Miller gets in ISK department. He's the one that decides what Carolyn Bennett gets in CERNA. The one that decides what goes into the minister that handles ISET's training. How much money goes over there? How much goes to Bill Blair for policing and everything else? Sunia Ogimao. He decides. That federal budgeting process is key. And we have to lobby, we have to advocate, so there's more money for education and housing and infrastructure, all those things that you need at the First Nations level so you can meet the needs of your people based on treaty rights, based on Aboriginal rights, fundamental human rights, access to potable water, all comes down to that federal budgeting process. And so within the next 2 or 3 weeks, there should be a federal budget. We're lobbying hard, we're advocating hard to influence Sunia Ogimao on what goes in there. Because it's over almost like a $340 billion budget every year. And for First Nations people, we're 4th on the list in terms of allocation of resources. There's national defense, there's health, we're 4th in terms of allocation of new monies. And there still has to be greater investments, because the socioeconomic gap that exists between Canadians and First Nations people still exists, and it's huge. So the line we always use is maintain momentum. Maintain momentum. Keep investing in education. Keep investing in housing. Keep investing in infrastructure and water, because the gap is still 6th versus 63rd. We're here 63. Canadians are up here. This gap's got to close. So keep investing on that. And driving the federal budget, there's this thing they call the throne speech. The throne speech. High-level government priorities are outlined in that throne speech. Chiefs, you'll recall the throne speech from this year. Go back and look at it. We advocated hard. And I'm going to say first time ever, they had an Indigenous peoples chapter in the throne speech, because that has never happened before. Never in the history of Canada was there a chapter in a throne speech dedicated to Indigenous peoples. First time. And it's about time. It's about time. That's what we see happening. But in that throne speech, what did it talk about? There's 5 or 6 key priorities. So this government listened, because we advocated pretty darn hard. The big one, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And our message to government is this, both federal governments, provincial governments, and even preparing for the FMM next week. Now is not the time to take your foot off the gas on reconciliation. Now is not the time to back away. Now is not the time to give up on hope. The UN Declaration provides the way forward, the roadmap to reconciliation in BC and in Canada as a whole. So when will first reading be done on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? We're going to keep pushing hard for that to be implemented soon, very soon. That's what we see. That's one, the UN Declaration. That was mentioned in the throne speech. They said within 12 months that a federal government bill will be introduced. And it has to be as good as or way better than Bill C-262 and even better than Bill 41. Passed in BC. It has to be better and build upon that. But the key thing, Chiefs, is getting it introduced for first reading. Because then, no matter what's introduced, it won't be perfect. And we have to make improvements to that bill. And yes, it's going to be introduced, moved by Minister Lametti, Minister of Justice, seconded by Minister Carolyn Bennett, moved and seconded for first reading. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, federal government bill, very important. But we know it's not going to be perfect. But at least now you have the legislative process now to make changes, make amendments. And then we have to have a very key lobby advocacy strategy with an institution that we learned is pretty darn powerful for getting legislation through. We learned through Bill C-91, the language bill. We learned through Bill C-92, the child welfare bill, the importance of having a Senate advocacy strategy. The Senate, the Canadian Senate, very powerful, very powerful. They can help you, or they could hurt you. They can help push legislation through, or they could delay it, or they could kill it. So you need a strategy. You need a plan. Make sure that this legislation on the UN Declaration gets introduced for first reading, but nobody's celebrating until we hear two words: royal assent. Royal assent when it becomes law. And that's a struggle, and that's a journey. But getting it introduced is number one priority. The other ones in the throne speech, investments in health. And mental health is a component in the throne speech. So we say, is that talking about the National Youth Suicide Prevention Strategy that's needed? Because 5 to 7 times the national average, our young people are taking their lives. Not acceptable. So where are the investments? And there is a role for all levels of government, both federal and provincial, to get behind this. Health investments, mental health investments, suicide prevention strategies, to give our young people hope, to let them know how valued they are, how loved they are, how special they are, no matter what they're going through, no matter what people are telling them, to give them that little hope. Cling to that. So mental health was talked about. Infrastructure gap to be closed by 2030. Infrastructure, it's mentioned in the throne speech. How is that linked to the resources now? For housing, water, roads, bridges, infrastructure. Major investments. Building upon the $21.4 billion over 7 fiscal years. Major investments in infrastructure. It's a key piece. The full implementation of C-91, the language bill. Again, Cookby, Ron, I always lift you up because 30 years working on this. And we're getting closer now. Closer now, and the importance of language. Language is so vital to our nationhood and sovereignty. Language is linked to our ceremonies, linked to our land, it's linked to our waters, it's linked to everything what we're about. C-91, full implementation. C-92, child welfare, full implementation of that bill. And everywhere I go across Canada, different reserves, different tribes, different nations, different territories. Some people say we support C-92, but there's problems, there's issues. Where are the financial resources to help implement when we have our own laws? Focusing on prevention, not apprehension. Putting the needs of the child first. All those good words. But you need the resources. You need capacity, financial resources to fully implement C-92. And the nugget that I hold up all the time in C-92, First Nation law is paramount. That's the nugget. That's the little bit of the jewel there. First Nation law is paramount over provincial law, even federal law. So what another opportunity to exert your jurisdiction and stand in your law, stand in the power and authority of your law. That you not only have jurisdiction on the reserves, but off reserve as well. And pushing provincial governments to work and establish those bilats or trilats, or however you want to call it. And I had the opportunity to meet with your Premier, Premier Horgan, yesterday. And we pushed him, and he said, Chief, we have that going here. We have a table on child welfare. I said, well, is it working? Because in Canada, you're probably ahead. There's no table in Saskatchewan yet to do that. And don't get me going on the Belle Province de Quebec, mon ami, what Premier Legault is saying, challenging the constitutionality of Bill C-92. Our message is clear. What a waste of time, energy, and effort. AFN's intervening as well. Because our message to the Premier is work with your chiefs in leadership. Don't go to court and fight this. Work on jurisdiction. Collaborate, cooperate. Who's working? How does this system work on reserve versus off reserve? Work towards that, putting the needs of the child first. So working on C-92, looking at it, full implementation. And there is April 7 and 8, major conference coming up on child welfare. So we need to keep that on your calendars. Looking at the best practices. Cook B. Wayne's leading the way, many, many years. So we have to learn from each other. But C-91, C-92. The other one, MMIW, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, 231 calls to justice, throne speech. National action plan done by the end of June. Very important work. Very important work. How is this going to be implemented? What's the role of the families? How does that all fit? The family liaison units. All these, the implementation of 231 calls to justice. So that was in the throne speech. And the last 2 points, the climate crisis. It's a big piece. Climate crisis. And so yes, we hold up Chief of Soup, Chief of Planish, solar. Not only solar, but he's got 20,000 oysters. He said, I got to develop a taste for oysters. I just haven't gotten it down yet, Chief, but I got to ship in oysters across the big waters. I also lift up Henvey Inlet. Big turbines, wind turbines. I also lift up Chief King from Gull Bay, microgrids. Saving 350,000 liters of diesel he's not going to use this year. Solar power, wind power, all those things, the gifts from the Creator, all those spiritual energies, our people are showing the way. There could be a really good transition from our dependency on fossil fuels to clean, green energy, and that's what we see happening. And I've also said, you're not turning the taps off on oil and gas overnight either. There's a lot of chiefs, a lot of First Nations looking at LNG, looking at oil and gas development, but they're also balancing the environment, the economy. They found that sweet spot. And I've said this to governments and industry. When you include First Nations from the start of any major project, you find better results. You find that balance. So we're going to keep encouraging that as we move forward when we deal with this climate crisis, not only in Canada, but throughout the world. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about this thing that's moving around the world. This little, I'll call it a little bug. That little COVID bug. How are we getting ready? Our message to the federal and provincial governments, don't forget First Nations people. How are we getting prepared? How are we getting ready for it? Institutions like the Red Cross. How are we involved? Do we have a plan? because it will affect, it's not a matter of if it will come, it's a matter of when. And so we are being really proactive. So I was surprised everybody's still shaking hands around the chief's table. I thought there were going to be elbow bumps. Because the premier yesterday didn't want to shake hands. He wanted to do an elbow bump. I said, all right, I'm not a hockey player. I can kind of go higher and kind of go low, depending. Little elbow bump, okay. Little hockey player coming out. But we have to get prepared for that, the coronavirus. And so building relationships with the Red Cross, health authorities, district health boards, federal, provincial government strategies, and how it affects Indigenous peoples across Canada. I also want to talk about the fisheries and Bernadette Jordan and the Big Bar Slide, and soon it's herring season, and people told me pretty soon there's the herring down. So strategy and plan to implement that 60-day notice to how to deal with the salmon and the fishery industry. And so there's a major conference coming up June 2, 3, 4, and 5 in Fredericton. There's a fisheries forum over here happening as well. It's a big issue. It's our relatives, the swimmers, there's trouble. Our relatives, the finned ones, are having trouble. So what can be done to assist? How can we get First Nations involved in the planning and the organizing and the monitoring and resource management to make sure that there's something there for ceremony, for food for our people? Balancing that, getting involved every step of the way. And so we're going to keep encouraging that dialogue to happen, but again, the jurisdiction. Some people like these words, co-management of the resource. It's a possibility, no question. And I'll acknowledge things as well, because our four-legged relatives, the caribou, need help as well. Northern BC, major agreement last few days between Canada, British Columbia, West Moberly, and Soto. Major agreement, 30-year agreement. Working together to make sure that our four-legged relatives have places to calve, places to grow and develop, make sure that they're looked after. So they're, in spite of all the challenges across BC or Canada, there's these little bright spots that happen. And that's just one of them, that agreement between West Moberly and Soto. And do you think the non-Indigenous people in that territory like that agreement? Do you think they embrace that agreement? No. Because the other thing we need to address in Canada, and we see it even from this Wet'suwet'en situation, is that there's still a lot of racism and discrimination. And it's our children that are going to those provincial schools that feel it. It's our people that are going to universities that feel it. You know, people rolling out, what are those people want now? There's a lot of racism and discrimination, and we say the lateral violence has to end. The discrimination has to stop. And that you can't criminalize people for defending land and water. You can't criminalize people for standing up for their rights, title, and jurisdiction. And some will call it an inconvenience for what happened. It doesn't compare at all to the injustices that our people feel. And so there's got to be a lot of education awareness that has to happen. And that should lead to understanding, and that should lead to action, so that there's more an embracing of those principles of peaceful coexistence and respect between our peoples, so that we mutually benefit from sharing the land and resource wealth. And an interesting point from some chiefs, because everybody says, well, in BC there's no treaties. We've got Aboriginal title and rights everywhere. And then I think, well, there's Treaty 8 in northern British Columbia. There's the Douglas Treaties. And then the teaching is this, and this is to the governments, federal and provincial governments and municipal governments, because everywhere else, I'm from Treaty 4 territory. And just because you got a treaty, the governments think, well, we got the land. Ni stamina no instotain, cede, surrender, relinquish. No instotain, those words, cede, surrender, and relinquish. I don't believe Chief Little Black Bear, my chief, where I'm from, Little Black Bear, had a good legal counsel in 1874 when he entered into treaty. I don't believe my chief, Little Black Bear, understood the Queen's Commissioner about cede, surrender, and relinquishing all this land. Don't understand. Even this term, crown land. What is this crown land? Even our reservations, your reserves. Oh, it's federal crown land set aside for the use and benefit of Indians. According to whose law? According to the doctrine of discovery? According to the doctrine of terra nullius? That somehow by planting a flag, nation states somehow gain title to land and jurisdiction and resource because of that? Don't understand. So even dealing with the term crown land, I urge all chiefs to continually use assumed crown sovereignty and assumed crown jurisdiction. It's assumed. And then in our treaty territories right across, and I talked to Chief just now, I talked to Chief Conrad Siwi this morning, he phoned me, that's why I'm saying this. The Siwi Treaty. Again, the point he says to keep using Chief Bellegarde, we didn't cede, surrender anything. Even if you have treaties, it was a sharing of land, a sharing. And so I'm going to keep stressing that. In Cree, in the Moines, they don't understand that word, cede, surrender, and relinquish. In our case, we say depth of a plow. Our grandpas, our chiefs understood they want to farm the land. We'll only share this much. Magigwayuma, nothing underneath. Just this much. That's in our territory. It was all about sharing, not giving up anything. So we have a lot of work to do to fix these 4 policies. And we've got to find a new word than claims. I don't like land claims, comp claims, spec claims. We've got to find better terminology. And we're going to work on that. First Ministers meeting coming up next week, March 12th. Issues. We know they want to talk about the economy. We know they want to talk about the fiscal stabilization. We know they want to talk about healthcare and northern priorities. That's their priorities. We also said we need to put on the table UN Declaration, Bill C-92, Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, calls to action. And we will make the plea and the request and demand that instead of just this time for 20 minutes, 10 minutes we got to speak, we should have a First Ministers meeting dedicated to First Nations issues. That's what we're going to push for. Something we need. We need to focus on. And it's not just the federal crown. These 13 little crowns, these 13 little governments as well have roles to play. Because even them too get billions of dollars for education, healthcare, social services. How do First Nations access? Talk about jurisdiction. All those things have to be worked out. So push for our own First Ministers meeting. Prime Minister calls those meetings. It's his meetings, not my meeting. And we had our AFN executive call, and I'll try to get the women's voice. I know that Chief Kalani and Chief Roseanne, because I get to speak for 10 minutes, and then I get to bring in 5 people in, so I want to bring our regional chiefs in. Trying to alter and influence that. Making sure we have a strong message, because even to Premier Legault, pushing him on C-92, and as well challenging him in a good way that don't make statements like there's AK-47s at the blockade. That's very inflammatory. Causes division. Causes red flags to go up. That's not the way to bring people together, and that's not showing leadership. So we're going to push like that. Not because we have, because we need to. And so the FMM's coming up next Thursday, March 12th. We're going to work on that. I've talked about the federal budget. The other thing, chiefs, is this Prime Minister, we call it the Prime Minister Bilat. So we have 3 meetings with the Prime Minister and Cabinet 3 times a year. We're going into the first one. At the first meeting, the Prime Minister usually comes. So what's on the agenda? Everything we just talked about. UN Declaration. MMI, the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, the action plan, full implementation. Fixing those 4 policies. The National Treaty Commissioner on behalf of the Crown. We have a relationship with the Crown. High up. We don't have a policy with the Crown. We have a treaty with the Crown. We have to respect that and follow that. So we have a lot of work to do, no question. And I really want to thank Chief TG for his work as well on the fisheries file, the ECDEV file, the justice file. We're doing our best we can to work as our team to put pressure on the federal government and those little crowns as we move across Canada. And we always try to find ways to make our AFN more relevant, responsive, and respectful of the diversity. And Bonnie Leonard is working on the charter. I told her, I'm going to make sure I mention that, Bonnie. Don't worry. She's doing a good job. Her and Casey. I think Casey's here. Oh, she's back. Yeah. So we really welcome them in trying to fix that charter because it's so outdated. We need to look at all things, how to make it better. Role of the Youth Council, the Elders Council, the Women's Council, having voting there. What's the role of the Confederacy? Do we need it? Yes or no? Strengthening the role of the executive in terms of monitoring. All these things are going to be looked at. And so we lift them up for that process. And so chiefs, you'll be coming together in July in Halifax. They're going to roll up their report and say, here's what we've heard in their dialogues across Canada. Here's what they're recommending for changes to the charter. And we have a 60-day process. We want to make sure that that's amended and looked after as well. So Chief DG, I know the chairs are looking at me enough now. Give me the cut sign, National Chief. I want to thank you for listening to my time and the words here this morning. Ixi, kanaskum tinawa.
Do you want to take a couple questions?
Yeah, if there are.
Thank you, National Chief. Inspiring as always. We have time for a couple questions with the National Chief, and I know, Doug, you're on the list, but you've been on the list first all week or all day, so I'm going to look around and see if there's somebody else that actually... Is there anyone else that has a question for the National Chief? I'll go to microphone 10. Please identify yourself.
ACM, Sauktalsqui, Tlizulqua, Staelis, Atisqualwell, Quills, Quitslala, Clawale, Zitalipsit. My English name is Chief Ralph Leon of Staelis. First of all, thanking the staff for making our meetings happen. Thanking Perry for making time for us, along with you know, our regional chief. You know, the work that you guys do together is very important to BC, and I thank you for reminding us that no one can provide a right that already exists. Our rights do exist here, and thanking you again for providing balance in everything that we're doing, and making it Latsama, making it one for us. And you know, a lot of the issues are really important, and my neighbors' commitments are important to me too. I have both of them on both sides of me, and you know, we sit together, lots of lot, and that's the only way we can make it work. We sit together and we work together, and that's what I've seen here in the last couple of days. And thanking you for coming here, and you know, assuring us that we're going in the right path, which we should be. Some people say, you know, we've been seeing this for years and years, but a lot of it is evolved. The 10-year grant, the Blue Cross for our health, all those things are evolving, and we thank you guys for all that beautiful work. Thank you for standing up for our water brothers and sisters, the salmon, everything like that. It's very important to us. The slide affected probably all of us in this room, but a lot of us did the work together to assure that a lot of our elders had salmon last year, and we'd probably do it again this year if we have to, stand together. And we thank you for standing with us on those issues. And finally, you know, I was watching the races, you know, Facebook and the news and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not a person to sit back too often, but I sat back and I watched it evolve, and I seen what I seen, and it wasn't very good. They said, oh, they blocked off the roads, and they affected our food, they affected our jobs, they affected our ways of getting home on some of the roads. Now it's just for a couple hours. Just think, every time we go hunting, every year, we hit private property, no-go zone, no everything. Imagine how we feel when we go get our food. For hundreds of years that they've been here, 153 years, whatever it is, but with that, you know, thanking you again, Perry. Yatukusai, ACM.
Thank you. The national chief has to leave approximately at 10:15, so I have time for 2 questions. I'm going to recognize mic number 24 and mic number 9. I apologize right now that I can't get to the entire list. And if you're looking for the aquaculture meeting, it's down the hall. Apparently, we've hijacked people. Microphone 24.
Wake Waite Brisel Koyensquest. Wake Cookby, thank you so much to our National Chief, Perry, for coming here today. I lift my hands to Willie Good for starting us off in such a good way and such a warm welcome to the territory and the beautiful hosting of Nanaimo. I'm just really cognizant that this morning, some youth that I've had the chance to sit with on and off again over these past weeks, the 5 youth were arrested this morning at the BC Legislature. In that time spent with them, we know that they helped really, there's the good work that comes from your office, National Chief, but there's also the good work happening at the front lines to make sure that, like our colleague over here said, that there is times when we have to occupy to make sure that we're heard and seen. We saw that when I was in your territory, Treaty 4 territory, with the Idle No More movement. We see that again right now. There's good discussions coming from these youth. They talk about reconciliation being dead, but they also talk about redress. When you talk about a lands claims process, what they talk about is redress. And they are tuned in and they're switched on. And I just really wanted to acknowledge their good work of what's going on. I witnessed the sacred space that they held. I witnessed the way that they ensured that there was safety and well-being, that I can't speak for any other place than what I personally witnessed at the BC Legislature, but I know there was a lot of misreporting. I know as well, and I thank you for your good work, that you use your office to amplify the truth and myth bust and slay those lies that are out there on our behalf, and I thank you. But we know so much of the racism is based on a perpetuation of untruth. And I want to also just state for here, for what I personally witnessed week after week at the BC Legislature, was of people who wanted to come together as community that embraced Natsamat, that embraced all my relations, or as we could say, White Consultant in our language, or Swetmastine. And I really wanted to ensure that that was understood. If there was any opportunity to continue to meet with them or have them connect with the AFN Youth Council, I think that would be amazing. I think there's great opportunities. I'd love to see something like that come forward to the AGA in Fredericton, because there's been great movements. I, again, can't speak for the other places, but I can speak personally to what I witnessed from the youth that occupied the BC Legislature. Thank you.
Thanks, Rochelle. Microphone number 9.
Michelle, thank you, National Chief, for your presentation. Want to share an observation or two made by our good friend Jody Wilson-Raybould yesterday. Jody spoke to the importance of a legislative framework to implement Section 35 rights, not an empty box that the Department of Justice always says, not an empty box always asserted by Dr. Doolittle, a full box of rights. So I look at the public debate taking place in Canada now, the fear of job loss, the fear of economic loss, and I think what an ideal opportunity what an ideal opportunity to move forward with the Valentine's Day present that the Prime Minister promised and never delivered better than 2 years ago. He promised us a legislative framework to do just what Jody talked about yesterday. Recognize and implement Section 35 rights. So I'm a little bit troubled, and I shared this with Minister Mark Miller yesterday. Chiefs, you heard me. I was troubled about moving to UNDRIP legislation. I shared concern that the law had already been written, that there was already a plan moving forward for that bill to be tabled. And he didn't answer me directly, but I understood what he was telling me. The bill's written and it's moving forward. We're not engaged in that. We're not involved in that. And now, I'm sorry, National Chief, when I hear you talking about let's amend this policy on spec claims, let's amend this policy on comprehensive claims, we've lost our damn way. We have to be talking about Section 35 and a legislative framework so each and every one of us, whether we're treaty or non-treaty, can get that recognition. And we can conclude reconciliation. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, 9. I will recognize Bill on 11, and then I'll go to the National Chief for wrap-up.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle. Just quickly, I wanted to send a note to National Chief. Thank you for being here, on behalf of Chief Wise, who's home with the bad flu. I'm one of his council members, Squeeze Hilton, Bill Yoakum. I just wanted to relay from Chief Wise that you're always welcome to our territory, and we lift our hands up to you for being our voice and also being a voice for our peoples, but also nice to also know that you also have the elbows for our people. Hi, Sepka, thank you on behalf of Chief Wise and the Snamo people. So thank you very much.
National Chief.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the Snamo Nation, Chief Wise, and the elbows, and thank you for the good words. And Grand Chief Doug, good comments about Section 35, and that's good. Something else that we can take as Chief TG, Chief Gislain, to recommend that legislative framework moving forward. I think we're going to look at adding that to the list with the PMO bilat to get the process started, because that's really what it's all about, because the Constitution's the highest law in the land. And we've always said it's a full box, not an empty box. And we're going to keep moving through. We see the realization of that in terms of the right to self-determination, the right to self-government's in there. And so we need to look at that legislative framework to really give teeth to Section 35. We had it since 1982, and there's nothing to say other than Supreme Court decisions, like the Williams decision, the Chilcotin decision. It took 25 years. So we need a better process. We keep moving that. So we're going to keep pushing that. So thank you for that good direction. I'll say that good direction there. Chief Russell, the 5 youth arrested, and getting them to hit and connect with our youth council. We're going to look at ways to do that. But I'd suggest as well that the Prime Minister has a youth council. Our youth council should be meeting with that youth council or be part of that or fill that up. And so we're going to recommend that and take that forward. And I want to acknowledge the youth for their word, redress, land redress. That could be the word we start using. So again, good thoughts, recommendations coming forward, because that racism is a perpetuation of the untruth. And we've got to fix something that's very important in every province and territory. And that's something you can urge the Premier here is to fix the curriculum. So they teach about Aboriginal rights and title. They teach about the residential schools. They teach about the Indian Act from K to 12, so that there's a better result when those kids coming out of grade 12, they know what it means about jurisdiction and rights and title. And that's something we can take away from and keep pushing forward as we move forward. But thank you for that. And so we're going to look at connecting. And the energy of our youth we need to tap into all the time. We're getting old. We've got to tap into that energy of our young people, and they help drive us forward. And I want to lift them up and say thank you for that. And again, Chief Ralph Leon, thank you so much. We'll follow up on that Eagle resolution that was passed. We have to do that. And I look forward to coming out and wearing that beautiful hat you gifted me with in June sometime when that big boat race is on. So I say thank you so much. And thank you so much here at the BC Chiefs Forum. And Chief Terry, thank you so much for your good work. And we'll see him next week with that FMM. All right. Thanks, Chiefs.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, National Chief. Thank you to the National Chief for being with us here today. We're going to shift now on the agenda to, we've got a shared territories and overlap forum. Would ask Cook P. Judy Wilson to come up and join Robert Phillips from the First Nations Summit Task Group, along with Regional Chief Terry T.G. To bring us through that presentation. I also wanted to mention too, one of the staff, there's a slide here that talks about an events website for the BCAFN. I'm not sure if someone can put that up. If you go to that website, you'll be able to connect in and provide feedback on the meeting, I believe. So if maybe someone from the technical team can put that particular slide up, that would be, give everyone the link that they need to connect into that particular website. So Regional Chief, Robert Phillips, Cook B. Wilson, I'll pass the floor over to you for the overlaps, shared territory and overlap forum discussion. Thank you.
Acknowledge Snamo, Chief and Council, hereditary chiefs, regional chiefs, the national chief, matriarchs, elders, youth and representatives around the table. I thank the elder for the prayer. The goal today is to have a discussion on shared territory or overlap and whatever it may be called in your particular language and ways, to move beyond that discussion. In our discussions before, we want to come to some sort of consensus on this. We do realize that we need to build something here, a framework, in order for us to get past what we've been dealing with for the last quarter century. We need to resolve shared territory overlap. It's been long, way too long. We're going to give a summary overview. We're going to put some options on the table. We're going to have some food for thought. We're going to look at what needs to be done. It's going to be put in a discussion paper. It's going to be shared with the leadership so that we can have that. So when we go to the meeting, we will have action and solutions. I think the current situation, as we all know today, it's unresolved. There's no framework. And whether you're in the treaty or out, that we need to reach this consensus I talked about. You've been left on your own. You've been trying to deal with it. We know that just like not only the leadership but our staff, we do 10 different things day in, day out. We know you don't have the funding, and you're going to need funding in order to do this work. We know that research is required. We know that when you talk to your neighbors, we need to have some sort of, if not done in traditional ways, a defined process in order to have those discussions. And this has to be, whether it's with proof or without proof, whether it's with evidence or not, there are many questions. Who will decide? We know that there hasn't been much precedent beyond what research that's required. We also have our traditional ways, as you know, and there have been successful shared territory overlap agreements and discussions around the province. We've had meetings in the past where lessons learned, and we learned a lot, but it still remains an issue. We're all families. We all share the same communities. We have nations, and nations to nations, not with Canada and BC, but with ourselves, our neighbors. We have to ask ourselves 3 questions. What do we want? How are we going to do it? And who's going to do it if we come to an agreement that we disagree? So I do believe that there's an opportunity here, and we have to follow that opportunity. The chiefs, the leadership, community members, people in my family and outside the family have all said we need to resolve this. Leadership is interested, I understand. And just like any family sitting around a table, we have to have those discussions. We have to build this framework. We cannot leave it for future generations any further. So, there are many options. There's no magic wand, as you know. And we're going to have to get down to do that work. The federal, provincial government and others, funding is required to do this work. Whether we have an institution of any sort, and there's been many thoughts about what type of institution, that's another thing that needs to be brought up. The role and responsibilities of those institutions or institution if we go that way. So we ask you, when you go to this meeting, what's the date? March? Yeah, March 11th to the 13th, that we come in there with an open mind, an open heart. We bring our ideas, we bring our thoughts, we sit down, we communicate and talk. I think that's the best way that we go about it. And as you know, with the Leadership Council and our organizations, we have different mandates, but we all agree, as just like you and your neighbors, I think we agree that we need to resolve and move beyond together as one. Cookstown, thank you.
Good morning. Cookby Judy Wilson from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs and First Nations Leadership Council. I wanted to thank everyone for being here this morning and the wonderful prayer this morning, and also National Chief's address to our chiefs here in BC. And he touched on a lot of the issues already that we're faced with, because in BC, there are modern treaties, but there's also a great many of us that are outside the treaty process. And the work that the government has done has not really effectively addressed any of the solutions in regard, if you call it shared territories or overlaps. Those are created by the government, basically. And our respective organizations, we have resolutions directing us to work on this important issue of shared territories and overlaps. I know in our nation we don't like to call it that. I know historically we've had, our ancestral chiefs had declarations, accords, and intertribal arrangements in regards to kinship, alliances, and peacekeeping. We've had a long history of that kept our nations, an understanding with one another. A big aspect was alliance building, not dividing our nations the way the government policies do that. So we're looking, and one key point was, I remember Louise Mandel speaking to us at one time, and she was saying, if there's an argument over the exclusivity of the land claims, the land defaults to the Crown. And I remember that because I was going, how can it default to the Crown? If we have our historical, claims, or whatever you want to call it, the historical history to the land. So I know in common law there's lots of gaps, and we have to be able to stand up our own Indigenous laws and our own jurisdiction over the lands. And part of that is how we did deal with, these outstanding, because you got to remember there's such a colonial history with the way the reservations were set up. Those were not our part. There was the Indian Act that was set up, that was not our part. And it was designed to remove us off our land. So we were dealing with all of those colonial doctrine of discovery policies and notions that, we didn't have a proper title to the land. So I think through this processes, whether you're going through the inherent title and rights or the Modern Treaty or the Douglas Treaties or any of the processes, it is the big part of redress, of standing up your territorial lands, of your kinship ties and your alliances. And only we can do that because only we know that history the best. The government, they go by 1846, and a lot of it's just, then they do that strength of claims thing, so then they minimize it to the lowest spectrum on that HIDA land claims spectrum. So those policies are always working against us, and we know the history of the comprehensive claims and the specific claims, and all of the policy driven federally as well. So I think with a big part of it is, we are having in the agenda the policy legislation practices leading, to what happened with the issues of shared territory and overlaps. The existing principles that First Nations have developed that may be helpful, progress that First Nations have made, the governance and nation building for sure, Indigenous laws and other sources, a big part of this, and potential institutional supports such as the potential for an Indigenous Commission, the range of mechanisms that could be used to assist to address shared territories and overlaps in a principled manner that is durable and credible. So moving forward, I think it is only our nations that can deal with this issue, and it might be challenging for some nations, and it really will, and it means we have to come to a common table, a common ground to be able to discuss this, because far too long we've let the government divide us and the government to make these decisions, and we are talking about the future of our nations, the future of our children. All of these things of the UN Declaration Bill 41, they can only do so much. It's a human rights framework. And same with what the federal one will be, is a human rights framework, because we don't even have that basis. But once we get that in, we'll have it, like in BC. But it's getting it fully implemented is going to be the work we'll have to do at all levels. And then our own laws are supreme on the land. I know in 1910, our ancestors, our chiefs wrote that in our 1910 Sir Wilfrid Memorial, Laurier Memorial, and it still holds true today, because they can't show how they ousted our laws, but we have the foundation of our laws that are very much alive today. And so I just wanted to say that, and I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that we will be accepting written submissions on this issue, and I'm encouraging nations to do that. I think it's going to be very important to have that submissions. And then the background and document discussion papers will be online for the event too, if you want to pull them down and take them a look. I know a lot of the nations are working on these issues, and it's going to be really interesting to see and have that 3-day discussion, 3 whole days dedicated to this discussion, so that we can really have frank and candid discussions about this issue. Instead of having to let the government lead us down another path, we have to make our own path for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Cook B. Thank you, Robert, for presenting on this today with myself. And I think it's really important to know and understand that if we allow other governments to try to resolve this issue, we're led to a really terrible place in terms of what they've come up with provincially, such as the strength of claim process, which we all stated in this room and our other organizations that's an inappropriate way to address this issue. And more importantly, that this is our issue that we need to resolve. Time and again that we've brought this up, that the resolving of these issues, such what we call overlap and shared territories, needs to be done by ourselves. And in many respects, when we don't deal with this issue, and we're dealing with our neighbors, and in some cases they're our own people, it leads to different ways of trying to deal with it, whether it's sitting at a table, doing it the traditional way, perhaps in the longhouse or the big house, or in the most terrible way, we go to the courts. We go filing court cases against each other, and that's really not our ways, and that's really taking things to extreme levels. And but what we lose is those opportunities when we're fighting over different territories that we share with our neighbors, the economic development opportunities for those areas. And right now, currently, there is no framework to deal with this. And perhaps in the future, what we're looking at, there may be an opportunity to have an institutional support. Perhaps there needs to be an Indigenous Commission that needs to deal with some of these issues. if that's one of the ways that we go down in terms of this meeting over the 3 days next week. So the agenda would look at the policies, legislation, and practices that addresses the issue of overlap and shared territories. We're looking at existing principles that have been developed by our First Nations peoples. Current progress with First Nations that have tried to address this issue, such as friendship treaties between our neighbors. And as our national chief said, really reaffirm our governance, reconstitute ourselves, or really affirm our constitution of our own ways and our own laws in dealing some of these issues. Previous meetings in the past that we tried to deal with this back in 2007, 2014. Seems like every 7 years. Maybe we're supposed to have this meeting next year. No, I'm just kidding. But I think we can't, as Robert said, we can't leave this to the next generation. I think we've let this sit for far too long. We need to deal with this issue, and I think the sooner we deal with shared territories and this notion of overlap, that we can come to a better place so we could start dealing with our affairs. And more importantly, here in British Columbia, start dealing with the land question. And we're seeing it play out in the Wet'suwet'en territory. And really that's one of the ways that can be dealt with protest, to deal with overlap and shared territories with other governments that are implementing their own laws in our respective territories. So, important meeting. It's been called for time and time again over the years, and so next week is when we'll be meeting about it. So thank you. Hope to see you next week. Masicho.
Great, thank you very much. This is such an important issue. Really, I'm not going to encourage a lot of discussion here at this point. We've got a break coming up right now. There's going to be 2 or 3 days next week for everyone to get there to help to build the pathway of resolving this issue. As the panelists said, time's really up on this. We can't allow this to continue to be one of the major weaknesses of our work and our advocacy. We have to, if we're going to have strength at home, we need absolute clarity with our relations next to us. Is Ray Harris here again today? When I was at the First Nations Summit, I used to say to people, can you imagine living with Ray Harris as your neighbor for thousands of years? It's a difficult proposition to imagine. And you've got to really know how to build the right relationship. But it's important work. It can be a source of great strength for you at home if you build that right relationship with your neighbors. You hold each other up in powerful ways. So that is going to be an important bit of time that's going to be spent next week on this issue. Really thank the panel for sharing. And I think if there's no urgent direction to the panel to help shape next week, then we can shift into a break right now for 15 minutes. And if everyone has the agenda, make sure everyone has the agenda for next week as well. I believe it's available somewhere here. Cookby Wilson is it can be made available here by staff. Pardon me? Please take this moment while you're having the break to go and visit the vendors that have set up all of the beautiful work that they put together. So 15-minute break, everyone. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes. Thank you. All right, if I can please call the session back to order. We're going to begin with the next panel presentation. We have half an hour of time on the BCAFN Sustainable Economic Development and Fiscal Relations Strategy. We have Regional Chief Terry TG with us on this panel, along with Patrick Brennan, who's the program lead of the Indigenous Internship Program at Vancouver Island University. So, Regional Chief and Patrick, I'm going to pass the floor over to you to begin the discussion on this issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug. So on the ECDev file, most of it I've went through with my opening presentation yesterday, and I just want to recognize Chief Cynthia Dick, who was here yesterday. I don't know if she's here today, but she's on the champions table. And among other First Nations, we have 11 that have been appointed to the champions table, and we have 11 CEOs from industry. And with this relationship, we've had several initiatives that we started back in 2017, including implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, and how that can be utilized in the realm of economic development, and and further to that was the, as I stated in my presentation yesterday, the Black Books, which in many respects is an offshoot of the Jody Wilson-Raybould, the Red Books, which are the governance toolkit. This Black Books is the economic development toolkit, which is a guidebook for our First Nations communities. And as I stated, we had many sessions across British Columbia, well over 20, including economic development forums that we had over the past couple of years in Vancouver and Prince George and other areas. So we've had several other initiatives, as I stated, a carbon project with the Tsilhqot'in in their tidal land area. We're looking at different ways to see how we can utilize, how we can initiate economic development initiatives within tidal land areas, and also with Claytley, a carbon project in their territory. So a couple initiatives that we're working on with the on economic development. We have several policy papers that we're developing, and also we're also, as part of my economic development file nationally, I'm the lead on the chair of Aboriginal Skills and Training. There will be a presentation later on today on ISETs. It used to be called assets. Now it's Indigenous Skills and Employment and Training. My push there nationally is to continue on to see that there is more funding that is more equitable in terms of keeping up with the rate of inflation and also keeping up with the rate of our population growth. In the new ISETs agreement, the first 2 years, there is an increase in funding after the first 2 years, but then it levels off. We would like to see more of an increase that is on the rate of inflation and also the rate of our, as our communities grow. And we're one of we're, if not the fastest growing population, our First Nations, so we would like to see certainly an increase in funding there. So there will be a presentation later on today on ISET. So with that, we do have an initiative with Vancouver Island University that Patrick is here to present on, and I'll pass the microphone on to Patrick here.
Thank you, Regional Chief. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation, and I would also like to thank Chief Wise for the significant support that he provides not only this initiative, but numerous other initiatives at Vancouver Island University, and Chief Seymour from the Cowichan First Nation. I'd also like to thank Billy Yoakum with Qualit Lalem, who's been a big supporter of this initiative in terms of hiring our interns. I'll run quickly through this presentation, but I'd like to focus more after I've gone through it on what we've learned to date, and how as chiefs you could potentially support the initiative and how we could potentially support you. So as the regional chief mentioned, the Champions Table is made up of 11 First Nations leaders, chiefs, and 11 private sector leaders, CEOs. And an early joint initiative of the Champions Table was the creation of the Indigenous Intern Leadership Program, which formally started in January of 2019. So we've been working on this for 1 year now, just over a year. Through the Indigenous Intern Leadership Program, qualifying Indigenous post-secondary graduates apply for positions with prominent BC companies for a 2-year period. But I want to note that our current group of 30 interns are placed, it's a combination of First Nations organizations, First Nations communities, companies. A couple are in the public sector in terms of government at the provincial level. So it has been a mix. Again, the goal is to place them with companies where they can get 2 years of experience, but we've ended up placing them in a number of organizations beyond just the private sector. Again, the program allows for a rich experience that builds personal experience, networks, and knowledge. And by providing recent graduates with workplace skills and training beyond their classroom learning, the initiative aims to assist in building a strong foundation towards a lasting career. The interns, we see them as well, obviously, as future community leaders in business, BC's economy, and to identify and fill skill gaps common in many First Nations communities. So we, in an ideal world, they will be hired after the 2-year period if they wish by their employer, but we also understand that a number of them may take the 2 years experience they get from this program and go back and work for their home community. At the request of some of the partners in this program, including communities and the interns themselves, we have moved beyond just finding employment. We have had situations where people approach us who have very recently been hired at the community level and they want to benefit from the professional development that's offered through this program. I don't say no. I mean, our role at VIU is one of support for this program. It's co-chaired by BCAFN and BCBC. My feeling is a cap has not been placed on how many interns can be in this, and I feel that the network that's being created through this will be a benefit to these professionals long beyond this program. Just in terms of, again, kind of a general guideline on qualifications, each employer will have their own needs and skill set, education requirements, but general sense, the interns are 35 years or younger. I am working currently with interns who are older than 35, so again, I don't believe in saying no. I'm there to work with interns, communities, employers who are interested in being part of this program. Graduated or graduating from trades, technical program, diploma, degree, or higher level of education, self-identify as Indigenous, are a BC resident, and have a social insurance number, just in terms of the forms and things of that nature that are part and parcel of the program, which I'm available to assist with as required as well. So in terms of Vancouver Island University, as project sponsor, we administer the program and are the primary point of contact for both internship candidates and employers. We are obviously working closely with BCAFN and BCBC. Derek Hansom has been a huge help at BCAFN. President and CEO at BCBC, Greg Davignon, is the lead, and obviously he has staff who I work with in moving this forward. And we've also formed a working group made up of officials working in career centers at the 25 post-secondary institutions. As chiefs, and my business cards are here and my email address will be at the end of this presentation, you could really help me if you have partner post-secondary institutions that you're working with, either colleges or universities, to inform them of this program, because For me, it's a bit of a catch-22. They'll tell me for reasons of privacy that they can't share with me the names of their Indigenous students or share information on this program. But as I mentioned when I did a presentation on this in Prince George, they're able to find their graduates 2 weeks after they're out the door and when they're looking for a gift from them as alum. So oftentimes if a chief writes a short note to them informing them of this program, it's amazing how many phone calls I've been able to receive. We've held regional outreach sessions on the program. Again, as I mentioned, the program was launched in January of 2019. I guess I didn't update this last week, so we're now at 30 interns in the program. Program is one of a series of efforts at VIU to ensure Indigenous students access post-secondary studies, succeed in completing those studies, and ultimately transition to work. Benefits of the program: we do have a network of Indigenous professionals that we have formed. It's an informal network, again, where professionals can have access to one another. They can share with one another some of their experiences in the workforce. It's an open forum, so you know, we will provide updates and you know, professional development events that are coming up, but it's very much intended for the professionals themselves to access and ultimately speak with other professionals who are in the program. There's also the professional development. We offer 1 to 2 professional development activities each year, which are hosted by the Champions Table. The last one we had was in November. It was co-hosted by BCAFN and BCBC, and it focused on leadership. I expect the next one will be held in the fall. That's the plan at this time. There's a certificate of completion, which is given out by BCBC, BCAFN, and VIU. So where I feel others can help me in terms of identifying talent is I ask each of you to help me identify Indigenous professionals who can benefit from the meaningful work provided by this. And those could be positions that you're looking to fill in your own community. Again, the challenge once Indigenous students have graduated is that the university, it's very hard then to connect with them. I do work with BCAFN to connect with them. I work with the BC Association of Aboriginal Friendship Centers, but it can be a challenge. And obviously addressing the gap, please join us in trying to address the gap in opportunities for Indigenous communities and professionals, and this is one program that could make a difference there. I'm open to any questions that you may have. Again, my email address is patrick.brennan@viu.ca, and my cards are here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Regional Chief and Patrick. We've got a couple of minutes here for any questions or comments from the floor. Not seeing any. I want to thank you very much, Patrick, for the presentation and the important work you guys are doing, and Regional Chief for the update. We're going to shift into the next panel then on cannabis legalization and regulation. I'd like to ask Chief Harvey McLeod and Chief Don Tom to come forward, along with from the Cowichan Cannabis Jurisdiction, Chief William Seymour from Cowichan Tribes, along with Jody Dick from Cowichan Tribes. If you can please come forward for the presentation. Microphone one.
My name is Harvey McLeod, Yalmechum, Chief for Upper Nicola. I want to start by just acknowledging the territory that we're on. I have fond memories of this part of the world. There's a healing institution just up the road from us. I was fortunate enough to go there in 2012 and participate in a trauma program, a 3-week trauma program. That program changed my life. And I always have prayers for the institution, for the work that they do, and thank this nation for hosting a healing place like that. We'll have a real short update on the work that we've been doing on cannabis, a huge challenge bestowed upon us by the leadership to have some discussion, open the doors, have some dialogue, have some understanding about how we're going to be included, how we're going to have our foot in the door to ensure that the opportunities and the concerns that our leaders have, our communities have, our mothers and grandmothers have about the industry are addressed. And we can bring them assurances back to our community that we have included in our discussions and our plans with the province to ensure that we're sitting in the seat next to them. So before I go on, I'd just like to introduce my colleague, the chief.
Yes, I'm the chief. It's a little nickname he has for me, I suppose. Thank you, chief. I'm just having a little bit of fun with him. Siem Nisal Quinn, Siem Nisiaya, my dear elders, family who are here today, Chief Don Tom, Sartland First Nation, Vice President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and also on the working group for Queetsum, who is here today as well.
And the BC Cannabis Secretariat have a working group to come together to discuss and address mutual priority topics. And the priority topics and issues that we're faced and challenged with is long. And to have a complete understanding about what we're doing, what's happening, the legislative process, the application process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The list is quite long. And we do bring them topics to the table. Right now we have First Nations Leadership Council representatives from the 3 organizations. You've met them here this morning, and 7 Indigenous nations are listed on the screen who are also participants on the working group. We've wanted to make sure that we're hearing from the communities, from the leaders on what challenges they're facing in securing and getting involved in the opportunity. And we, as me as a chief, who's not involved in putting together an application or has a plan that we're working on to ensure that we can get the licenses and permits required, we asked for some help from our leaders in our communities that are involved in the industry to ensure that we're getting the correct information and the issues that we're facing as communities are addressed at the table that we sit with the province and the Cannabis Secretariat. The BC First Nations Framework and Action Plan was reviewed and endorsed by the BCAFN at the AGM in September of last year. The First Nations Leadership Council is pursuing specific actions under each of the priority areas that have been identified by you, the First Nations working group representatives, the people involved in the industry, and are expressed in resolutions of the AFN, including the territories. Ideally, products would be First Nations at each stage of the supply chain. This may not be possible at the early stages that we're at right now in the total market development involvement. But the plan is that we will have a stamp, some form of recognition ensuring that the product that's going to be on the market is of the highest quality. These policies and programs should be implemented without delay. So we're working on that, how it's going to plan out. The discussions and understandings that we're having with the province and the Cannabis Secretariat are huge. The steps that we have to take to ensure that we're involved and finding the door to making it happen. The issue isn't easy, and the discussions that we have at our table are lengthy, but we are making some progress. I'll hand it over to Chief Don to give you an update on some of the work that we've been involved to date.
Thank you, Chief. Where are we? It's Nanaimo. Thank you, Doug. Who are you? What are you doing here? Yes. It's the Cannabis Working Group here, doing our due diligence. Yeah, that's right. All right. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our progress update. Oh, geez. All right. Listen to my words. December 13th, we had a look at some of the policy proposals for First Nations products featuring shelf space, farm to gate, direct delivery. BC's seeking guidance on the development of each of these programs, including eligibility criteria. The FNLC members have expressed that must be dedicated process for First Nations to participate in these programs and policies separate from other small-scale producers. These changes must offer tangible benefits for First Nations over and above the existing policy framework or what is available to other participants in the market. Province-wide policy changes and engagement with FNLC should not hinder the bilateral relationship between First Nations and the province. To be eligible, businesses must be owned, managed, and operated at a minimum of 51% by BC First Nations governments or BC First Nations individuals, and eligible entities should not be restricted to those located on reserve, treaty, or traditional territories. Ideally, products would be First Nations at each stage of the supply chain, but this may not be possible at early stages of the market involvement. These policies and programs should be implemented without delay. On February 28th, the working group had met with the Secretariat to provide some feedback with the Ministry of Advanced Education, Skills and Training, Cannabis Sector Labor Market Information and Research Initiative. Copies of BC's requests for proposals is in your kit, as well as a letter from Regional Chief TG asking the process to be paused until First Nations can be properly engaged. The FNLC working group on cannabis had flagged this as an area that, as we move towards the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, that to have data sovereignty and to be a part of what we want, if there is to be research that we want to be included in what our priorities are and what is going to be done with the information. So we had flagged this. They had halted and have halted the RFP process. BC Guide on Production License Toolkit that will be launched soon to make the federal licensing process clearer. I'm sure many of you who've looked at or wanted to get into production, that it's quite the process, and even one for myself who have looked at the process. It's very, very comprehensive, and which would require many of our Indigenous communities to seek out legal help and to seek out consultants who would be able to help us. So we're trying to make this an easier process so that it's understood and the expectations to get into the industry would be much more clear. We also met with the Community Safety Unit. They provided an update on their mandate, which has powers to take enforcement action against unlicensed retail stores. They are taking a public education approach and working with First Nations governments for the most part. They are complaints driven, and you may have seen a number of what the working group calls busts. They've done a number of busts in Victoria, Abbotsford, and throughout the province on unlicensed retail stores. And they, again, being complaints driven, recognizing that some of our First Nations have retail stores that maybe have not gone through the licensing program from the province. The unit has made it very clear that they are complaints driven and that they do not intend to step foot into any retail store within your community without first talking to the leadership. And so if you have any comments or questions regarding the unit, you're always welcome to reach out to them and ask questions. But know that their approach is not to just come in and shut down stores, or that they are taking an approach that provides an opportunity for those who maybe have the retail store to work towards getting licensing, or that they given time to shut down. And there have been a number of just with the initial visitation for stores off reserve, there have been some who have shut down, but also there are some who have continued to do their operations unlicensed. And you may have seen in the news recently that they issued, what was the $1.2 million fine or something like that, Chief? 1.2, yes, 1.2. But they are complaints driven. Jurisdiction and revenue sharing, we have taken these conversations as far as possible at the working group, but continue to push for a political mandate and table to develop these options. First Nations can continue to develop their own vision for this and exercise jurisdiction. In our mandates that Chief McLeod had spoken to, that in our respective resolutions from UBCIC here at BCAFN and also at the summit, that it's very clear that jurisdiction and revenue sharing is one of the areas that we have been given the mandate to push. We've had some reluctance with the Secretariat and the province. We've addressed these at the larger table of the First Nations Leadership Council. We have, I believe, some of the letters to the ministers would also be in your package as well. But we are continuing to push, and much like we've had gaming revenue sharing, we're also looking at what revenue sharing would be for the cannabis industry as well. So it's one of the areas that we're pushing to have in our terms of reference, but we have been unsuccessful thus far to have it be part of the Secretariat's mandate to have these discussions. So we continue to push on this, but it seems to be at a standstill, that the Secretariat is willing to have these discussions, but our concerns are, when we have these discussions, where do they go? And are they moving up the chain to the minister? So we're continuing to seek that in our terms of reference, that jurisdiction and revenue sharing are a part of this. Section 119, Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, BC is beginning to negotiate agreements with more First Nations regarding cannabis. Feedback from some nations indicate that substantive economic benefits and recognition of First Nations authority to make laws and regulations in relation to matters addressed by the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act are not included in the Secretariat's current mandate for negotiations, despite legislative authority to do so. The province's current mandate for Section 119 agreements is too small, not in alignment with the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It is crucial that the province move forward in good faith on expansive Section 119 agreements and engage in transparent communication with nations and representative organizations. And I think we'll hear a little bit more about that perhaps from Couch. And if your nation is interested in sharing about your interests and experiences related to Section 119, please reach out to Chief McLeod, myself, or the Chair, Wes Sam, or BCAFN Special Advisor, Jamie Sanchez. He's here somewhere. Going forward, we'll advance these issues and also focus on addressing access to capital for First Nations. I understand that BCAFN will also be releasing an economic development discussion paper on cannabis and is seeking to develop legal resources for First Nations regarding cannabis.
While there's a lot of work happening at the provincial table, there's also work happening at nationally. And we have a AFN Chiefs Committee on Cannabis. That committee is chaired by our regional chief, Terry Teegee, and I sit on that committee on behalf of this region. Developing components of a national framework for exercising First Nations jurisdiction, including options regarding excise tax revenues. How is that going to look like? How are we going to move forward to make that a reality? Right now, there's kind of like a discussion and us identifying the regional gaps. Because of our involvement in British Columbia, we have some other regions across Canada that have been engaged in this process for a little longer time, and there are regions in this country that have not looked at the opportunity and the concerns regarding cannabis. So right now we're doing a little regional gap assessment to see where we're at, to pick up the regions that are a little bit behind and to give support for the regions that are a little ahead of us. We have regions like Ontario who have been quite involved and engaged in this whole process and developing the laws that they need to be fully engaged and involved in the process. We are meeting with federal departments and other stakeholders to better understand how we can move the Chiefs Committee on Cannabis mandate forward. It's not an easy process, but we have started the discussions. And because of our diversity across this country and the work that we've been doing as individuals, as individual communities, as regions, and across Canada, we are finding that the discussion table, the agenda isn't long enough, or nor do we have enough time to really get involved in the in-depth discussions that we need to ensure that we're putting pressure on the federal government to include us in the work that's being done. We've had 2 meetings so far. We're having another meeting next Monday and Tuesday here in Vancouver, and we'll continue to move and support our regional chief to ensure that we, as communities in this province, are included in the changes that are going to be needed to be made at the national level. So with that, I'll hand over the mic to my good friend, the chief from Cowichan, to give you, Chief Seymour, a little bit of insight as to what they've been facing in their community. Chief Seymour. My buddy.
Thanks, Chief. Siem na siya, siem na holmoch, Aitzap ka siem tanit na amastok, ati tamach tana stanemoch mastimoch. I want to thank everyone that's here and given us an opportunity to give an update as to what Cowichan Tribes is doing in the cannabis industry. We know it's been a long process going through the provincial government for licensing. Took several meetings for us to get through, and You know, I sit on a gaming committee because of the casino that's on our reserve. And so years ago, I had to go through the same process to be able to sit on that gaming committee. And then I had to go through it again to get a license for our cannabis. In our discussions with the province, because they're opening up their own stores, do they follow the process? They don't. They said because their staff, when they're hired, go through this vetting process so they don't have to do it again. They get a license when they want to open up a store. And because we are our own government, we need to be looked at in the same manner. I was vetted by the government 10 years previously, and then I got to do it again where the province doesn't have to do the same thing. So when we talk about UNDRIP and how important government to government is, that's the kind of things we need to talk about. I did bring that up with the minister. You know, we met with the licensing board. How can we speed up the process? And they said, Chief Seymour, if you fill out an application, you'll get your license in 3 weeks. Well, it was 8 months later before I got a reply. I had a meeting with Minister Farnsworth. We followed up with a meeting with the Attorney General in EB. And then we had another meeting with the two of them sitting in the same room. So it took a lot of meetings to get things moving in the right direction. So we now have a retail store opened on our reserve. We're fully vetted for that, got a license. We're looking at possibly end of this month, we'll be opening up our second store in North Cowichan. You know, when we applied to open up a store in North Cowichan, the province applied as well. North Cowichan approved both stores opening up, almost neighbors. So in our meetings with the ministers, we kept telling them, you guys need to respect our jurisdiction, our Aboriginal rights and title to our own territories, and pull your application out of there and allow us to get in there to provide jobs for our community members, to bring some source of funding into our community. They finally did pull their application out of there, recognizing our rights and title to be in our own territory. So I think that was a big step for the government to do something like that. But we need to continue moving forward, and the Section 119, when we were meeting with Farnsworth and EB, they asked if we were going to be going into the production side of it, and we said we were. We talked about Section 119 and how we can move forward with it. But everything we were discussing in our meetings have now become part of the agreement that we've drafted up in the 119. And the biggest thing we're pushing for is that government-to-government relationship. They need to recognize First Nations as a government and treat us as such, and not just a business. And we have that wording within our agreement. Truthfully, the government asked if we can draft something up because they didn't have a template. And that's what we've done, so we're now waiting to meet with Minister Farnsworth and Attorney General Eby to follow up. We know there's going to be some changes. We're pretty strong in our wording about our Aboriginal rights and title, our jurisdiction. Bobby, can you hook up our slideshow?
Right there.
Good morning. I'm Jody Dick, and I'm their CEO for their Economic Development Corporation and the lead negotiator for our cannabis file. I've been working with the chief for over a year and a half on cannabis and been given direction by our leadership to push for equal jurisdiction for Cowichan in our traditional territory and push to make sure that our Section 119 agreement provides all of the authorities we need in order to have that jurisdiction and in order for us to have revenue sharing opportunities within our territory. Costa Cana is our corporation that we partnered with, and we set it up as a limited liability partnership for the reason that Cowichan needs to be sitting at the table with our partners and make those decisions as to where our cannabis operations move forward in. We hold 51% of all of our corporations. We have a retail corporation that has our retail stores open on reserve. We have another retail store off reserve that's going to be opening in North Cowichan. And we have 2 retail stores that are looking to open in Victoria. Our business model has always been to operate on and off reserve and to get into not only the retail side of cannabis, but the production side of cannabis as well. Costa Cana, we really feel it's important for community engagement, and the biggest thing for leadership was to secure a government-to-government agreement to be able to get regulatory positioning. And our leadership, we were asked at one point to meet with the Secretariat and discuss what we would be implementing in a 119 agreement. In those discussions, it was clear that the Secretariat really wasn't open to an aggressive agreement. And from the beginning, Cowichan has made it clear with both Minister Farnsworth and Attorney General Eby that Cowichan and every other First Nation should have the ability to operate as an equal jurisdictional government. And we wanted to set up a parallel process under Section 119 that would allow Cowichan the same authorities that the government has set out for itself. Within the Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, the government has the ability to exempt itself from a number of regulations, almost all of them. And in our 119 agreement, we've made it clear that where it says in that legislation the government may be exempt, that government is also including Cowichan tribes within our territory. It's a very aggressive agreement, but it's something that we've had on the table from the beginning. It's aspects of that agreement allow us, as a government, Cowichan tribes would then have the authority to possess cannabis. As a government, Cowichan tribes would have the authority to buy and sell cannabis without licensing. As a government, Cowichan tribes will have the authority to purchase cannabis from federal producers, including facilities owned and operated by Cowichan tribes. We have made it clear that in that agreement, we have that exemption for the tied house rules, so all of our production will go into our retail stores. One of the things, or the biggest negotiating point with the government has been on the gray market. And the process that the province set up for itself is only accenting the gray market. So with that, allowing Cowichan and other First Nations to produce high-quality cannabis, sell it through their retail stores at a lower cost, we are actually helping get rid of the gray market and making a positive step forward in our communities. As a government, we would be exempt from the prohibition of being able to promote our own stores, and we'd have the authority to supply cannabis and to be supplied cannabis from any other federal licensed production facility. As a government as well, we have set it out that we will be exempt from the regulations set out in the Control and Licensing Act and have those options to opt in or out of the regulations depending on our Cowichan law. It's set up that once our agreement is signed, Cowichan tribes will then pass a Cowichan tribes cannabis law that will embed the 119 agreement and provide that authority and jurisdiction to operate on and off reserve within our traditional territories. With the jurisdiction, Cowichan tribes may enter. Okay, Cowichan tribes will have the opportunity to partner with other communities, and in that partnership under that agreement, we will be able to open up licensing production facilities and retail without licensing. There's a number of things. We're partnered with UBC on a curriculum for cultivation and production and a study on hemp and its potential for packaging with fruit and vegetables. So we've got a number of things on the go, and we're very excited about pushing forward with our aggressive agreement.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the panel for this important discussion of this relatively new development in terms of the economic opportunities for our peoples. Glad to see that Don's well aware now where he's at in Stanemo territory. And I think that there will be, if there's opportunity for questions and whatnot, maybe you can approach Jody and Chief Seymour and Chiefs McLeod and Tom at lunchtime. It would be great. And I think we're now going to, so I really want to thank everyone for the presentations that you've done and the important information that you've shared. It's really inspiring to see the depth of the work that's been happening and how far along you've progressed already. So I believe the regional chief has acknowledgements for the panel. So thank you very much, everyone.
We'd like to move on and invite Hugh Breaker from the New Relationship Trust up to give his presentation. He's from Tashot.
Can I do it here?
You can do it right there.
Thank you. This will be short. Just before I get to the reason why I'm here, should update you on the NRT. You'll all recall that when it was established, we were established with a $100 million endowment. Over the years, we have distributed more than $60 million in grants to First Nations and First Nations communities. And today the balance we have in investments remains close to $96 million. So we're actually keeping the fund stable as per the direction that we've gotten from the First Nations communities around the province, and hoping to grow it in the future as well. Secondly, you will all know that Cliff, our past CEO, moved on to Inspire, the national foundation, and is now in Toronto. We have been searching for a new CEO, and I'm happy to say we got a very large number of totally excellent applications. It's been very difficult for us to weed through them because many of them are very high quality, and we will be conducting, I believe, 10 interviews in 3 days next week to try and get through them and find a new CEO. So exciting times for the NRT. The board is looking very much forward to the process and gives us an opportunity to renew the NRT and its commitment. The reason I'm here today is at the present time we are constructing a proposal for the NRT Board of Directors to consider an initiative arising from the UNDRIP legislation of the province of BC. We would like to establish, we're not sure yet if it's going to be in the form of a conference or in the form of seminars. We're still playing with the idea. The first sessions will address educating you about what UNDRIP says, the UNDRIP legislation says, and what it means, what are the other examples around the world of where it has been used, and what is the forecast for the development of law as a result of the UNDRIP legislation. So it's really to inform chiefs and councils about what this legislation means and where it can possibly go in the future. We want to follow that up with a second session of seminars, which will hopefully help you to understand how to use it. And we want to make it practical. So if you're sitting in your First Nation office and you get a referral from the province saying we want to log X mountain, how does UNDRIP help you to confront that? If the province says we want to construct something, pipeline or something within your territory, how does the UNDRIP legislation help you to confront that? So that's what we want to do in the second part of the sessions on the UNDRIP legislation. We're looking to commence this very quickly, sometime before summer, and we're looking for your feedback. If you have any issues that you wish to see in those seminars or conferences, please come and tell me or call our office and let us know. If you want to have them regional as opposed to all in Vancouver, please tell us that too. I got an earful when I was in Prince George for the BC Natural Resources Forum a few weeks ago from the tribes in northern BC say, don't always have it in Vancouver, come up here too. And we'd be more than happy to do so if that's what the First Nations want. So we're going to develop the proposals, but we want to take direction from you on this. So please come and talk to us if you have any ideas at all on what you would like to see in the seminars and how you would like to see them fashioned. We would look forward to that. Thank you very much for allowing me a few minutes on your agenda today. Thank you. Thanks, Doug.
Thank you very much, Hugh. We want to deal with there's a resolution number 10-2020 in your package that's related to the endorsement of the First Nations Leadership Council 2019 appointments of 2 directors of the New Relationship Trust. This is a mirror resolution that's already gone through the First Nations Summit in the Union. The resolution says, therefore be it resolved that 1, the BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly endorse the First Nations Leadership Council's appointments of Miles Richardson of the Haida Nation and Wade Grant of the Musqueam Indian Band as directors of the New Relationship Trust for a 3-year term effective December 1st, 2019 and ending on November 30th, 2020. So if we could please deal with this resolution now. Moved by Grand Chief Doug Kelly, seconded by Cookby Ignace. Question has been called. Any opposition? Seeing none, that motion is passed. So thank you very much. We are going to move now one of the afternoon panels to now before lunch. So we're going to ask if Chief Mina Holmes, I think the title is President of the Carrier-Sakani Tribal Council. Is it Chief or Tribal Chief? Okay, my apologies. Tribal Chief Mina Holmes of the Carrier-Sakani can please come forward and share with us her presentation on the recently achieved Pathways Forward Agreement between the Carrier-Sakani peoples and the government of British Columbia. So Tribal Chief Holmes, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation and welcome. I kind of feel like this is, some of you might be a little tired of hearing about the Pathways Agreement. I've done this presentation a couple of times. One more time is all that I think you have to endure of this, so bear with me for those who missed it the first 3 times. The next slide, please. As hopefully many of you have recalled, January 29th, the sorry, I forgot the protocol. Like to thank you for Sanemo for allowing us to do this work in the territory. Thank you. January 29th in Prince George, the Carrie First Nations, which is a group of 7 First Nations that include Tilkazko or Burns Lake Band, Stalaten, Nadle Watan, Saikas, formerly Stony Creek, Nakazli Watan, Tlazda Nation, and Takla First Nation. We collectively have been negotiating over a period of time to what's now the Pathways 2.0 agreement. If you could go to the next slide, please. At that announcement, it was more of a celebration. We wanted to share with everyone what we felt was a groundbreaking agreement. Oh, I do the next slide, sorry. That is rooted in reconciliation and developing a comprehensive reconciliation over the next 3.5, 4 years with the province. And so we're negotiating comprehensive reconciliation that will, something that we can test drive. We've had to remind people that this agreement is not a cede, surrender, or anything like that. It is a government-to-government agreement, a nation-to-nation agreement that we're not giving up title, we're not giving up our rights, title, or interests. We're actually protecting them. And out of this will be something we can test drive over a 10 to 15-year period to see if it works for us, which is something that our membership and our 5,000 plus people needed, that assurance that we're not entering into something that would be permanent. We need to know if the course or the direction that we're going is meaningful and makes sense to us collectively. So, and this agreement started off back in 2014 when 2 of our communities brought a judicial review for the pipeline that coming through the territory. The communities felt that they weren't appropriately engaged and had some concerns, so a judicial review had started. And that prompted an engagement. And it wasn't easy even to get to that one. This was a different government at the time. So that started the collaboration agreement, and then which led to the environmental, social, and cultural stewardship initiatives agreement, and then on to the Pathways 1 agreement. With the new government, the Pathways 1 agreement was essentially just a 1-year start to get the discussion started. And then we had a new government, a minority government that seemed far more open to building a relationship with us than the past government had. I'm not disrespecting the past government. I'm just saying that the reality on the ground and that relationship building just was there more with this government than the last one. So it took a couple of years to negotiate the Pathways 1. It has significant elements in it around decision-making, for the Carrie First Nations with the province. It has governance, building capacity, forestry, mining, socio-cultural works. Some of those critical pieces that on the ground in the communities make the most difference. And our core principles in the 7 communities working together, there's 5,000 of us, plus of us, and it's our key principle is unity. Having 7 communities, so 7 chiefs, 7 councils, 7 communities, working together to come to an agreement where their independence is still secured, and while working together on the larger pieces, the larger common interests, and committing to work together regardless of once you're in, you're in. So we're committed to this as the Carrie territory of decision-making and stewardship of our land, and closing the socioeconomic gap of our members and the rest of BC and the rest of Canada. Another key principle that we have is equity, and the equity is demonstrated by how we share in the funds and resources. It's a model that helps us build capacity, have that equitable relationship regardless of the size of the community. So some communities are 200, some are 2,000. So we've come up with sharing models that allow for us to live within this principle of equity. And building capacity, I really appreciated earlier the presentation on the Black Book, the economic development. I'm actually sending an invitation to them to come to each of our communities and work probably some kind of workshop with us. The capacity has always been a struggle for all of us, and we take this step by step, but we're building out a strategy on how to build capacity in Carrick County Territory with our members and for future generations. A big outcome for us is the Comprehensive Reconciliation Agreement. We know it's a lot of work. It's actually when I think about it, sometimes I just feel a little bit overwhelmed the amount of work that we're talking about as we start to discuss jurisdiction around children and family, around the resources in our territory, and reviving our governance. I'm a Damashu person. I'm born of the Beaver Clan. And it's critical for us, as I continue to say in my own clan and publicly, that we have to work together. I don't participate or engage in divisive language or divisive approaches that I feel impede us from collectively being able to work together, building trust, building strong connections. We have to find ways to work together regardless of what our differences are, and that's focusing on what brings us together. And this is that rebuilding our nation, or you can call this rebuilding our nations. And we want to ensure that through this agreement that not only are we building a collective, large, comprehensive reconciliation agreement with the province, amongst ourselves and partnership with the province, of course, is that we want to ensure that our communities are well looked after and their voices are heard, that those people in the communities who are living in those circumstances, for example, in my community of Tlazda Nation, which is the Tache Reserve on the Stewart Lake just north of Fort St. James, we have a high suicide rate, and there's the socioeconomic issues that need to be addressed at the ground level. So as we're looking at building this large regional piece, we're keeping in mind and in our hearts is in the community at the membership level, regardless of where our members live, we need to have that relationship with them. Also in here is, in addition, within the Pathways Agreement, where it is an economic agreement, yes. We're working with the federal government to do a similar approach with them, and they call it a comprehensive intergovernmental agreement. It's called the CIA, which is like ironic. So we are working with them. Unfortunately, things have slowed down. I don't know if everyone else feels that way with this since the election, with having a minority government. It seems a little tougher. You have to kind of re-strategize how you engage with them, because it's like they're mostly dealing with crises rather than long-term goals and objectives. So we're really excited about this agreement. We felt it was a lot of hard work to get to where we are today. It's taken approximately 6 years to get this done since the first agreement. We're happy to share it. We're happy to talk about what the challenges were, what the successes were. And I find that one of the biggest challenges after speaking with our neighbors who we're building relationships with, alliances with the Shishal and with the Chilcotin National Government, is this ideas around unity and collectiveness and working together and continuing in that model. So I'll just leave it at that. Like I said, I know this is like the 4th time. In case you missed it the first 3, it's probably the last. So if you have any questions, I am here for the day. I'll be sitting in the back. If you just want to just casually have a conversation about this, I'm more than happy to do that with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Tribal Chief Holmes, thank you very much for sharing that historic development in your part of the world. We've got a bit of time right now. We're going to be, we're seeking to move another issue forward from the agenda from the afternoon to before lunch, the Women in Leadership Dialogue session. Before we get to that, I do want to deal with one support resolution. It's number 13-2020, support for First Nations and BC food security, sovereignty, and economic development. This is moved by Councillor Ryan Oliverius over here from the proxy for the Okanagan Indian Band. And I will read the resolution to you. Therefore, be it resolved that the BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly directs the regional chief and staff to advocate for the development of funding and other industry support programs for First Nations to maintain and reestablish their food security and sovereignty, and promote food-focused research to better understand the intersection of First Nations food security, sovereignty, and sustainability. And two, the BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly calls on the AFN Chiefs Committee on Economic Development to establish a First Nations food security and sovereignty working group to draft a framework and develop a position paper outlining the First Nations positions, and develop and advocate for First Nations specific communication tools and workshops to raise awareness. And three, the BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly direct the regional chief and staff to investigate advocacy opportunities regarding food security and sovereignty according to United Nations mechanisms relating to rights of Indigenous peoples, including the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, various opportunities administered via the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and a special rapporteur on the rights of Indigenous peoples. And four, the BCAFN continue to participate in the open-ended working group on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework facilitated by the Convention on Biodiversity. So that's the resolution. We have the mover, Councillor Ryan Oliverius, the proxy for Okanagan. Looking for a seconder for that motion. Cookby Ignace. Oh, okay.
You got Deborah Baker over there.
Yeah. And Deborah Baker. So, a comment, or were you seeking a second? Okay. All right. If you can clarify one more time, who seconded Cookby Ignace? Okay, Cookie Christian from Splatseen. So any discussion? Question been called? Did I hear question? Question's been called. Any opposition to the support resolution? Seeing none, that resolution is passed unanimously. Thank you so much. Do you want me to do 11 now?
Do 11.
Okay. All right. We are also going to deal with resolution number 11, another support resolution. I just have to switch over to that. This is support for Indigenous women, girls, and 2SL LGBTQIA+ People Declaration and Strategy. As you all know, there's been a lot of work in this area for over a course of a number of years, including recently the reiteration or rearticulation of the Women's Declaration from a meeting that took place in January. So this is a support resolution. I'll read the resolution here. Therefore, be it resolved that the BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly supports the 2020 iteration of the Women's Declaration. The BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly commit to honoring Indigenous women, girls, and 2SL LGBTQIA+ people, supporting healthy families and communities, and breaking the cycles of violence and colonialism. The BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly recognize the many benefits of hosting the women's dialogue sessions and the need for a strategic, action-oriented plan to address the issues and calls to action identified in the Women's Declaration. 4, the BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly directs the BC Assembly of First Nations to develop a strategic plan for addressing the Women's Declaration and other issues that impact Indigenous women, girls, and 2SL LGBTQIA+ people, which should include but not be limited to A, securing funds for the implementation of activities within the strategy, B, working with like-minded organizations, C, a review of all BCAFN policies and advocacy initiatives to ensure they are inclusive of 2SL LGBTQIA+ people, D, a review of all BCAFN policies to ensure they promote an organization that is free from gendered and lateral violence, E, ongoing action and advocacy to implement the 231 calls for justice in the Indigenous women and 2SL LGBTQIA+ people-led development of the National Action Plan, F, advocacy for timely and efficient registration for those newly entitled to status pursuant to amendments to the Indian Act coming into force on August 15, 2019. G, a plan to hold regional women's dialogue sessions. H, strategic initiatives regarding sexual assault supports, justice, and support for grassroots organizations and community-based initiatives. I, a plan to support the full and equitable participation of women, girls, and 2, SLGBTQIA+ people in political roles and in the workforce. And 5, the BCAFN Chiefs and Assembly directs the BC Assembly of First Nations Women's Representative to oversee the design and implementation of this plan and to report on progress at the BCAFN Annual General Assembly in 2020. So I'm looking for a mover and a seconder for this support resolution. Moved by Russell Coy, seconded by Deborah Baker. Any commentary on this particular resolution, Russell? Mike 24.
Good morning. I just really want to lift my hands to, this has been years in the making to get to this place, and some amazing leadership that has happened to get to this declaration. A lot of good work, both from the staff and from within our communities. And I really appreciate the BCAFN has over years been bringing us together again and again to get to this declaration. So I'm so happy to see it on the floor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any further questions? Questions been called? Any opposition to this support resolution? Seeing none, I declare this resolution passed unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to shift the agenda just a little bit, and we're going to ask Robert Phillips to come up, and Chief Terry we're going to talk about ISETs. And Harvey McLeod. Sorry. Harvey. Okay. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. We give ourselves 1 minute already, just to let you know. Perfect. Yeah. Sorry, but they asked us to come up, and we're going to give a quick presentation. We too have been going out and having a good chat with all the provincial territorial organizations, and sorry if I look a little bit scattered, but I got the notice, and here we are, and let's do this. So just to set a little bit of context, March 2017, BC chiefs and councillors met with the government to discuss the future of assets, which I now understand as ISETs, and some people have been asking me about the abbreviation. So again, Indigenous Services, Employment Training and Skills. Harvey has been dealing with skills and training for way longer than I have. And but again, the chiefs did recommend creation of a steering committee table to address joint decision-making at the federal and provincial level. And what we've been noticing, although there's been a lot of good work throughout the province with ISETs, assets, with the employment skills and training, we do notice that there are pockets of First Nations organizations here, universities, non-Indigenous organizations, and as you know, there's only so much funding that's coming into the province. And so we notice people, you know, again, in regards to proposal writing, before end of fiscal, you understand that better than I as chiefs. And so if we can get, I think, a little bit more organized around that so that utilize to the best capacity the funding, I think it will probably mean a lot better things in terms of skills and training for our people, just in terms of general discussion. In March 2019, the BCAFN, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and the First Nation Summit passed a resolution in February and March 2019 to establish this committee. In July 2019, Canada and BC expressed interest in exploratory discussions. In November 2019, the province BC passed Bill 41 and the Declaration Act. So the steering committee to date, composing of political representation from the three organizations, as well as from the Advanced Education, Skills Development, Social Development, and Poverty Reduction, Service Canada. The working group's been established with technicians in place, and we're having general discussions at this particular time. There will be a draft terms of reference. I understand there's information in the package, and there's an engagement session that was held at our gathering in January 2020, and we got some information again to be shared. There is a survey, and we're going to give you that information around the survey because we want your input. And the purpose and the scope of the committee is to be advisory in nature, improve the socioeconomic outcomes of First Nations people in BC with a focus on individual needs, leverage synergies between existing programs and skills, employment and training landscape, identify gaps in service provision and reduce overlap in order to improve capacity, develop skills, training, employment framework to better support the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. So we understand this would be, if we proceed, the first of its kind tripartite steering committee for skills and training. So there's a number of other information, the scope that's right behind me as well. If I may proceed, is it the green button? Yeah. Okay. And as you know, when we first sat down, we had this chart, and it was one of those linear charts. So the first thing we said, no, we have to start with the individual. And the individual, because as you know, in order to gain the skills and training, whether it's from kindergarten to grade 12, or for those that even do not complete, the training that they need goes beyond just school and education. So we're thinking about all the aspects, driver's license, if they need any other training, that life skills, all of those things that we've been talking about, leading to the family, community, service providers. I'm trying to rush here a little bit because I know we have other things that are on your plate. Okay. And maybe what I'll do is hand it over to the chief, and he's one of the representatives that is on this, and then I can just finish up whatever else needs to be said.
As you know, for some of us that are in this room that have been involved in employment and training over the decades, some of you will recall our Aboriginal Human Resource Development Agreements way back in the day. Through that program, we were able to develop capacity in our community, and we deliver employment training programs in our communities by us. We operated under that agreement for a number of years. It was a one-year agreement, contribution agreement that we all negotiated and signed and went and did our work. Over the years, it changed to ASETS, Aboriginal Skills Employment Training Strategy. Again, there was a small change. One of the big changes that happened was that we were able to negotiate and operate under 5-year agreements. And over the last few years, there's been a lot of talk and negotiations between ourselves and the federal government. And in them negotiations, with our support from our agreement holders, we were able to secure longer-term funding, 10-year agreements. And at the same time, looking for ways and means on how we can increase the budgets that came down through them agreements, and to expand the scope and the mandate of what we can achieve and support under them agreements. We're still negotiating and still finalizing the budgets. We've been demanding that we need more money in our communities for employment and training needs. But what we're finding is that over the years through ARDA and ASETS, we were able to find ways to support the people that really needed it. And we had a lot of people in our communities that needed a grade 12, that needed a driver's license, that needed a ticket, whatever. But now we're finding that the needs are even higher. Post-secondary isn't doing it. Secondary school isn't doing it. And we have to expand how we're going to reach and support the individuals in our communities to have the education and the training to secure full-time jobs. And no more looking at piecemeal job here and a job there and you're back on employment insurance. We're wanting people to really plan and find an area of expertise that they will be enjoying their work and really contributing to the economy of our communities and our territories. So we've been doing that. Some of us are negotiating new agreements in our areas. I know I am. Right now, for example, Shuswap Nation Tribal Council holds the employment and training file for the people in Shuwapmach and Lagabmach and us in the Nicola. And now we're starting to negotiate our own agreement, for example, in the Nicola. And at the same time, understanding the scope of the budget that's given nationally, how much is distributed provincially, and how much is going to the agreement holders in this province. And at the same time, holding and finding ways to ensure that the funding that we get isn't split out any further than it is already. Some of us that have been involved in this game for a long time can remember we had huge discussions and negotiations and some battles with our relatives, the Métis. And there was another group that was involved in the file that needed support as well. And that was a group called the Congress of Aboriginal People, the people that represent the off-reserve populations. So there was always discrepancy and no agreement on what each organization should get. And we're still at the point where the funding formulas that were developed nationally haven't changed from day one. Neither have they changed for this province. We're still operating under funding formulas that were put in place back in the 90s. And it's there for a reason. We couldn't find a way to have the open discussions, to open up negotiations and discussions on how we're going to share the little bit of resources that come down with the program. So we still have a lot of work to do. We are here in support of our organizations and communities that have the programming already, but looking on ways on how we can expand that. So we're having discussions with the feds, we're having discussions with the province on how we can partner up to broaden the scope of assistance that we can provide to our people. And that's why the questionnaire is so important. We want to get your feedback on what's happening, what needs to happen, and how we can support you in the work that you're doing with your people to ensure that they have the skill sets to go forward and find and secure a career, a long-term job. It's a challenge, but I think that we're ready for that. And we've developed enough of capacity in our communities to go and do that work. We've developed employment counselors, program managers, and developed the administrative supports to manage the program. And now it's a standalone program, and we're just looking for ways to ensure that the province and the feds are in the same mindset on how we're going to support our people. For example, we just talked about in the cannabis file. They're going out and they're wanting to do a survey of our people, where they're at in their education, the skill sets that they have, and the supports that they're going to need. We've done that already. A lot of us have done that already. We know where our people are. We just need the resources to support them as they pursue their training. So with that, a really quick update, a lot of work, and we're going to be needing your support just to give us your thoughts on the work that we're doing through the questionnaire. So with that, Wyatt Limlin, thank you.
Okay, really quick, so you see Maggie Mills there at the bottom, margaret.mills@bcafn.ca. That's, we're going to send out the survey. Finally, Chief Leon over there has been participating. He had the flu, so we told him to stay home. That was like last month. And the other things too, in regards to Cookby Wilson, who was very involved too on the onset of, before we got into more technical work. And finally, it's a steering committee comprised of all these organizations. It's in the initial steps, so we've already talked to Finesse, for example. We've talked to some of the other regional. Eventually, we're going to be bringing in everybody, but we wanted to make sure that you got all the information and that you provide the information that we need, so we're making those steps appropriately, okay? So I just wanted you to know that, so whether you have your own skills and training, whether you're in the treaty or self-government or your band or tribal council or wherever it's organized in your nation, that's appropriate, of course, and so we just want to make sure that we come together as one and make sure that we do the best we can for our young people and others that are looking at skills and training and employment. Cooksham, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And on behalf of the regional chief. And for everyone's information, there are surveys that can be filled out at the back and just hand them into the registration once you've completed them. We're going to draw 7 door prizes. The regional chief has already given me the magic tickets. So we're going to go with, and you can collect your prize over here at the Departure Bay room, 869-470. I looked at Cheryl. 869-497. No bingos? 497. 470. 428. Bingo. Go Tom. 506. 503. 441. Right on. You go to the Departure Bay room. 458. Right on. And so I need 3 more. Four, 5, 3. Right on. 435. 430. You got 35 and you got 30. We're done. Awesome. Okay. Announcement. Developing an Indigenous Knowledge Systems Framework workshop is Tuesday, March 10th, and these will be handed out during lunch. Let's break for lunch right now. It's 2. Yeah, and we have 4 presentations, 4 resolutions. We are on target to wrap up a bit early, and we have the reason we've pushed things and condensed things a little bit is we have the deputy medical director coming to speak to us, and so we needed to make a little bit of room for that. So we will reconvene at 1 o'clock. Thank you.
Should there be like a don't leave with
No, we can't do that. No, we can't do that. No? Only chiefs, not proxies. Yeah. I'll get.